What I do because I know it's right and I know we're going to get a benefit. And before Catalyst, the environment sort of never, it was there, but it never come into focus. Whereas now, since Catalyst, when there's a change and there's an economic benefit, you'll say, oh, hell, there's an environmental benefit there as well. So it made me look at the whole picture, not just, oh, it's going to save money.
I suppose the draw card for Catalyst was simply that it allowed us as growers to really push the boundaries, look at what was on offer, look at the business and the high cost areas of that business, and really probe that and, you know, work out ways that delivered better value, and in some cases it didn't have a good result. But at least we were able to do that basic work, understand what the results meant, and then make a decision from that to move forward.
Without diversification, we probably wouldn't still be in agriculture. We've had some really tough times in the last decade and even further. I'm just talking about the time since I've been in here. If we didn't have a diversification program, we financially wouldn't have been able to stack up.
Tony Bujega lives on the original farm his father purchased in 1953. One of the first 19 Catalyst growers, he credits the group for allowing him to think outside the square and try new things.
Change for the sake of change, no, but change, and when you can see a difference and you know there's going to be a difference, that's a positive. I don't think I could say it's one specific thing. It's just a lot of little things that make the difference. Like, you know, somebody will be talking and they'll say, oh, we're doing this with soybean. You know, I'm talking 15 years ago. And you think, oh, okay, you know, that's worth a try. It's just communication, networking, talking, and basically just listening to what other people got to say. I just think if my father never changed, we'd be still driving around on bloody horses. We stand still, we stagnate. We stagnate, we die.
How old are you now, Tony?
Oh, that's my business, mind your own business. Sorry. I was born in 1953, that makes 70-year-old last June.
Proving age is not a limiting factor when it comes to change. Like Tony, Joe is engaged in business processes and farming practices, inspiring his son Stephen.
When I've travelled with Nuffield all around the globe, you know, the most successful production systems were production systems that understood what complemented the core crop and what crop that was, and they implemented it and done well. So I think the long-term success in any cropping situation is to find what rotates well with your core crop. Every crop brings its own biology, so, you know, every new species we put down introduces another lot of biology, which is just addressing the basics of soil health. I mean, you know, Alan Garside and his team 25 years ago understood the fundamentals of that and the value of that legume. But since then, you know, we've done quite a lot of work with sun hemp in the early days and seen some real benefits with that particular crop, not only from the soil health perspective, but from what that particular plant offers. Industrial hemp is another one that we rotate and also has its benefits for the core crop. We've done maize, and, you know, of late we've introduced a macadamia orchard, which is a little bit different from the core cropping, but understanding the business and understanding the trends in agriculture, it's about looking at the bottom line and making that as robust as possible.
You've got to keep, you know, working out how you can keep evolving, how you can keep, you know, increasing your scale, to be able to manage times when margins are tight. When your price is below cost of production, you really need to understand what options you've got. And like, as we touched on before, without the diversification that we've been doing in our business, it wouldn't have stacked up. But when we threw an orchard or horticultural sector in our business, we threw around a heap of different things in that section. At the end of the day, what was probably the most appealing out of the Maccas was this potential to become some autonomy and in the running of the business. As we spoke about yesterday, labour is one of the hardest things that we deal with in agriculture, trying to secure good long-term labour. I'm hoping that we're going to see some autonomy in agriculture that's going to become feasible very soon, and which can help some of that fill that labour shortage.
Zoe Eager graduated with an Ag Science degree in 2017. Now specialising in precision agriculture, the focus is on using quality spatial data to increase productivity and improve profitability.
I've been working with Tony for over half a decade now. So my mentor, Natalie Fioca, was his original agronomist. She trained me. It was straight into the full hog. We're doing fertiliser, and we're not just doing blanket fertiliser, we're doing proper fertiliser based on our yield potential. So it was just straight into the deep end with Tony, but he's phenomenal because he's had so much experience. And when I first started working with him, I was still very early on in my career. But I think definitely my partnership with Tony accelerated a lot of my training. So we can have a look at a paddock and freshly worked, and it doesn't look like there's any variability. You run an EM mapper over, and it doesn't matter if it's got the same soil classification, it's going to have some variability. Now, just because you have variability doesn't mean you're going to get yield variability, but on Tony's farm, we definitely get yield variability. But we need a lot of data to make informed decisions.
2022, we purchased a yield monitor and fitted to our harvester. Because of our soils around here are very variable, our yield varies to the soil. We monitor ground speed, base cutter pressure. It generates a yield map, live data yield map, throughput through the harvester. So it gives us a big picture of what that machine is doing. Zoe rung us up and she said, paddock 15-1 at Rosella, farm 74B, needs gypsum. It was a bit of a shock because we've never used gypsum there before. And because of the soil variability, my next question to Zoe was, how much of the paddock and whereabouts? She said, I don't know yet. She said, I'm going to download the information from your monitor and then look at the yield map.
So in a block that Tony was taking to plant cane the next year, so it was becoming fallow, we had a look at that yield map, and the calculation that was done on the monitor, it just wasn't 100% accurate. And I really don't want to be using information that I don't confidently feel is going to give us a good outcome with a grower. So I said to Tony, I can't use that yield map, and that's just, the nature of the beast. So I said, what other information are we capturing at the same time? Which one of those is your base cutter pressure map. Now, it's really important to note that just because you have a variable base cutter pressure map does not mean you can go straight and do a variable rate application, because so many other factors such as the harvester operator, the speed that it's operating at influences that base cutter pressure. So the first thing I had to do was an investigation. We had this base cutter pressure map that had some pretty distinct lower pressure areas. What other data do I have of Tony's? And we've got about 20 years of really good spatial data here. So we put our EM map over it, and straight away we had a very distinct high electrical conductivity where we had our lower base cutter pressure map. So I thought that there's something going on here, but we don't know what actually is that yield variation caused without ground truthing it. So we went and did some geo-referenced soil samples in those locations, and we worked out where we had the low base cutter pressure, we had a lower yield based on the actual sodicity or the salt in that paddock, which tied up with our high electrical conductivity, because that's one of the features that EM mapping picks up. So straight away we knew that, and luckily on Tony's farm, the soil type here is called a Sandyford. It has very distinct sodic regions. So he'll have parts that are sodic, and then 50 metres away, it's not sodic. And we've got over 400 soil samples on this paddock across all our different zones, so we have a lot of confidence putting variable rate emollients on this farm. So it was really good to see that the data that yield monitor is collecting, sometimes if we can't use the actual yield calculation, we can use some other data sets. It's not always going to work, but in this case it did.
From that, out of a 15.6 hectare paddock, we applied gypsum on 6.1 hectares. Now, what Zoe did with that base cutter pressure map saved us $11,200 on one paddock. Now, to me, that one job basically paid that yield monitor off. And when you see that, you'll say, right, we're onto something good here.
Advancing technology in ag tech over the last decade, many companies are now deploying autonomous vehicles and robots featuring artificial intelligence.
We're lucky we're in an area where we do work with like-minded growers, and Catalyst has had that platform and helped that really develop. When you're adopting new technology like autonomous vehicles, you know, there is some risk around there and getting that whole concept to work well. If growers are like-minded and understand the risks and understand the benefits, I reckon that's a great way to go forward.
The feasibility has got to work, you know. And in saying that, it may be an object that you might purchase with a neighbour or a group of farmers, because one thing that robotics and autonomy can do, it doesn't have to go home to eat, doesn't have to go home to sleep. It'll work 24 hours a day, it'll work on Christmas Day. So, yep, I can understand that the costs around it at the moment is probably outside of where the business can make it stack up. But like any technology, I've hoped that will become, you know, the pricing will come down, become more affordable. It may require like a joint ownership of a piece of equipment to allow it to work 24/7.
Autonomy needs to be worked with. We need to understand the technology, adapt it to the farming operations that we're running. So it's getting close, but it obviously needs a lot more fine tuning. But it's the future, and that's where we've got to focus. We've got to look at all of those areas and understand the implications of it, the sort of the benefits of that and the downfalls of that, and then bring it into the business.
It's the future. Like, you know, change, I'm afraid, whether people like it or not, lack of labour, good skilled labour is very, very hard to find. It's getting harder and harder every year. So, yeah, robotics is definitely going to be the future, whether we like it or not. There's a place for that, but in our scale of economy, I don't think we could afford it. Maybe contractors come in. You know, that's what Mark's doing now, is spraying for grasses and vines. So yeah, in the future, definitely, there is definitely a place for that type of equipment.
I think one of the really good benefits where we're going to get robotics and automation is probably in the cane space, is the issue that we have with our seasonal labour force. So at the moment, I think the biggest boundary is that it's really set up for broadacre in the terms of making it economically work for us. But as technology gets newer, cheaper, I think we'll see some really good options on farm. We're already working in the autonomous irrigation space for flooding. So I think it's going to be a real key element on producing more on the land that we have with less inputs.
5 years ago, David Titmarsh left the building industry to semi-retire and chose the farming lifestyle, thinking it would be less demanding.
Thought it was going to be an easy life. That's not the way it is. So, implementing irrigation, a better system, quicker way to get over the ground, a little bit more flooding. We also introduce a slow release fertiliser, so the nutrients don't get washed away to the Great Barrier Reef, stay in the ground, they don't move as much, and we notice an increase in productivity. We're yielding more tonnage. When we were using alternative fertilisers, we were growing about 9,000 tonne. And we've increased that to 12,000 tonne.
From 19 farmers to 320 farms engaged over 15 years, leading revolutionary change means influencing generations to come through proven practice change adoption.
One thing I've always said about agriculture, you know, this is not a short-term gig, it's not a medium-term gig. Every decision we make is a long-term proposition. So if we looked at the business in the short-term light, I don't know whether I'd want to be here, to tell you the truth. But you know, I keep looking at the long-term prospects, and I think it's exciting what's going to happen down the track. You know, I think ag's got a lot to offer. I think it's good, it's great, you know, that we've seen broader adoption, and at the end, I suppose that sort of is comforting.